In order to develop good test-taking habits and skills, I think it's important for students to have a study space, a study area that they go to regularly. Once they have this space identified, it's going to symbolize for them what it is that they need to do, the tasks that are at hand that they need to be addressing. Once they have made this commitment, then it's going to be easier for them to demonstrate success around test taking and success in doing their homework assignments.
Usually when I prepare for tests, I make sure I kind of practice whatever we're expected to do on the test. So like for a math test, I'll do lots of practice problems. If it's an essay test, I write some essays on the subjects and try and work through the thinking process that I'm going to have to go through. I usually end up cramming, but I try not to because that can end up, you don't get enough sleep the night before, and that affects things pretty poorly.
I use index cards for every class I took, whether it be a math class, a Spanish class, an addiction class, a counseling class. And after each session, I'll make up these index cards, and I just continually study them. Just by repetition, I retain a lot more than I would have by going back to my notes or by looking in the book. And if there's something that I'm stuck on, I'll read the chapter over again. But the index cards has worked very well for me.
Once I'm in class and I know I'm taking notes from the teacher or the professor, and I try not to accumulate everything until the testing time. I spread it out and I study my notes after class just to get myself familiarized with all the things that I was taught in class, so that when it gets to the time of studies, it won't be me trying to clump everything together.
How do I prepare for a test? I cram. I have a busy life, so I cram.
As a previous procrastinator, I've learned that cramming for tests doesn't really work.
I study as much as possible, usually at the last minute or the last minutes. And sometimes it's great and works out really well, and other times it's disastrous.
If I know I have a test the next day and I've been in school, I try to go home and take a nap and then wake up feeling rejuvenated, steady. I actually try to bend the candle, so I stay up very late studying for that test. But I make sure I have some rest before sitting behind the book.
Sleep before a test? Not much. I don't get much of it because I'm cramming. Right before I take a test, I ask God to help me since I haven't helped myself.
I think really one of the worst things you can do is freak yourself out. It's best to just kind of be able to focus on what's going on. And so, yeah, being kind of self-confident going into it really helps.
I usually feel pretty good walking into a test. I mean, I have a little bit of apprehension, like, do I really know the material? I usually spend an hour before a test just going over, anything that I might have, forgotten about. But I usually feel pretty good because I put a lot of work into it. I study hard, and my grades show that.
Any test that you're taking is just part of your total grade. And that the first thing to do is to calm yourself down by answering all the questions you can answer.
Well, I think with any test, the first thing I do is just go through the questions one by one, answer the ones that I feel confident about, and ones that I don't, I mark them down, and then later I can take more time and work on those ones. Because otherwise, if you just work on them one by one and spend a lot of time on, like if the third one is a really difficult question, you waste all your time on that one and end up doing poorly.
The smartest advice of all is to use every minute that you're given for the test taking, because then you can say to yourself, well, I will use a quarter of my time for preparation and pre-writing. I will use a quarter of my time for answering every question that I already know the answer to. I will use another quarter to struggle with the more difficult ones, and then the last quarter to review what I have already done. I think that if you can go in with a plan, then we tend to stay calmer and we can access the knowledge that we've built up instead of the panic that we're feeling.
After a test, students should take some time to either process the test with their classmates, since they probably won't have access to the professor. it's going to be good for them to be able to talk about how they thought they did on the exam.
After I take a test, there's a sigh of relief and also a pat in the back that I survived it. You know, but a great thing is I usually confer with classmates how, we did or how we feel we did. And then we check on each other what questions, we think we've gotten right or wrong or things like that. But the majority of the times, yes, a sigh of relief as well as an accomplishment.
If they can look at those areas of that process where they felt good, where they felt empowered, where they felt strong, then they'll be able to repeat that behavior later on and maybe translate some of those skills into some other areas of learning where they might feel they have some deficit or some deficiency.
I think that we learn, if we benefit from the process of taking tests, we learn that we are better in some ways and not so good in others, but we can tool up to survive any test-taking situation if we realize ahead of time that that's true.
I was not very disciplined, and I had very little structure in my life before I came back to school. And just by the way I do things in the classroom and by the way I study for tests, I actually take that out into my job, into my family life, working with my kids, dealing with my kids. I think school's been advantageous for all parts of my life, not just academics.
If they can look at all of these things after they have completed an exam process, a testing process, and really calm themselves, think about what really helped them, even what helped them in terms of learning and studying this particular subject, is really going to make it easier for them to go into the next experience with some ease and with some confidence.